Mech pilots, online. BattleTech manuals, online. Long-term memory, offline. All systems bungled. Initiating BungleTech podcast.
In our 8th deployment of BungleTech, my spheroid co-host Michael and I are joined by one of the legendary voices of BattleTech, Tren Sparks, as we discuss storytelling in the BattleTech universe. We deviate a little bit from our battlefield report with something extra special and strange. We take a moment to discuss a variety of mistakes keeping us jumping around like fools, and read a sample from the short story Run Locust Run by Westin Riverside. So sit back, sip a cocktail of Necrosia, and relax for this deployment, MechWarriors. We're going on a vision quest.
Primary objective, podcast topic segment, initiating.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 8 of BungleTech. Today is a pretty exciting episode because we are here with a guest actor extraordinaire that is close to my heart. A senpai of mine, you could say. But before that, before I introduce this guest, let me once again introduce the refined, the sophisticated, the beautiful Michael. Say hello, Michael.
It's me.
Today's guest, legit. I am stoked. I don't know why he's doing the podcast with us. To be honest, he is a man whose voice you know. He is a saint in the stars, in the skies. As we aspire in the BattleTech community to get stronger, to get better, it is his voice in our head. He is the God voice of BattleTech. Allow me to introduce Tren Sparks.
Hello, thank you very much. I'm so delighted to be here on BungleTech. It's a great achievement of mine. Wait a minute. That's not how it's pronounced, is it?
I don't know. You're the voice actor.
It's a BugleTech.
Oh, Bugle.
We're just huge fans of like the big fanfares that you get. I haven't read any, but I assume there's lots of like dramatic fanfares to introduce different royal houses and stuff. So we're hoping you could tell us a bit about that.
Well, see, when I was in high school, I was in marching band and I played like 8th chair trumpet because like usually there's only 3, but I was really, really bad. So I was way down on the line to the point that they moved me to percussion, well, auxiliary percussion, because I was really bad at Anyway, hi. I'm really glad to be here. Thanks very much for asking me to show up. I mean, why am I doing this? I don't know. I just wouldn't do anything else today. Figured. Actually, I haven't gone to sleep yet, so I could be a little bit sleep deprived as well.
That's exactly how we want you. Sleep deprived and ready to rock, like all our games.
BungleTech, better than sleep deprivation.
So, for people that don't recognize the name Tren Sparks, well, Tren is a prolific narrator in the BattleTech universe and a prolific voice actor in other areas as well. How long have you been involved in BattleTech, my friend?
Involved? I'd say probably since about 2015 or so. I was talking to Mitch Gittleman up at Harebrained Schemes. At that point, it was like November, I think, of 2015, and I was working at Capcom doing quality assurance on the Mega Man collection. And during my lunch break, I was on the phone with Mitch Gittleman when he was asking me if I would do one of the voices for their BattleTech turn-based strategy game that came out in 2016. But that's kind of where it started.
Damn, that's funny. Quality assurance. A different path, eh?
Yeah.
And then that sort of lines up with the Catalyst Game Labs really getting going with publishing the new tabletop book.
Yeah, I was already playing D&D with John Helfers at that point. We were live streaming D&D for a long time, but he hadn't asked me to start narrating yet at that point.
I have an interesting question. Very interesting. Extremely interesting.
I hope so.
Quality assurance or voice acting? Which is more of a grind?
Quality assurance, definitely. Without question. With voice acting, you have, at least for me, you have an artistic expression that you're doing. And even if it's the same kind of work over and over and over again, it's still acting. It's still what I've wanted to do for most of my life. Quality assurance, you're constantly answering to somebody else. You are assigned, what work you're going to do. And a lot of the time, it is definitely not appreciated at all. Every time you do your job well, the people that you're doing it for just see you yelling at them, basically, always pointing out what they've done wrong, where they've messed up. And it leads to a lot of bitterness between the developers and QA. And that's one of the reasons why QA has had such a stigma and has never really been considered part of the development team for so long, because it's a very antagonistic relationship. You don't get that with voice acting and audiobook narration.
So as I understand it, I think I've heard you talk about this in some other BattleTech podcasts, but you're not a BattleTech player yourself, right? You're solely involved in the project from a creative perspective.
Right. There's a lot of math, when math and I have not been on speaking terms in decades. And this is usually where John Helfers is like, they're just D6s, man. I'm like, it's still math. You damned math rocks and everything. You're rolling them around. And then I have to add numbers up, and it brings the game to a screeching halt. That's why I don't play blackjack. It takes me so long to calculate up to 21 that the rest of the game just stops for everybody else. And they're just sitting there waiting for me to just be able to count to 21. No, just let me read and everything will be fine.
You're an actor, not a mathematician.
I'm going to have to tune into one of your D&D live streams, because I'm extremely curious how you get through a D&D session with your profound fear of numbers.
Well, that's easy. We use Roll20 and it does all the math for me. I click on a button and it says, you rolled a 16. I'm like, yay, thank you.
So because you're not a player, it's actually great, because you have this unique perspective regarding what your favorite part of the BattleTech setting is. I'd love to hear it.
It's actually twofold. For the people who play the game, I mean, the tabletop game is all about the mech combat. That is the be-all and end-all, the entirety of it. I don't know of anyone who does like a role play element to their tabletop game. They just get their mechs together, blow the living hell out of each other, and, move on to the next fight. And for BattleTech, that's what the tabletop game is meant to be. I mean, that's why it is called the game of armored combat. That's exactly what it says on the tin. That's what it's supposed to do. But there is this additional layer to it that is in many ways larger than the game itself, because it is so broad in its encompassing-ism. Yeah, I'm sure that's a word. John might correct me on that. I don't know. Anyway, once they start digging into, and I've noticed a lot of people who are starting to expand into the lore and either read or listen to the novels and whatnot, and get into like all this stuff, because it is rich. It is very deep. And we've had some amazing authors since the 80s. I mean, you can tell that some of it is, oh man, was it written in the 80s? But, like the more recent stuff is much more contemporary, but it's all still really good. And it's the performance, that's where my bread and butter is. And that's what I enjoy doing. But I still relish hearing my friends talk about, and then, we came around the building and there was, this huge array of tanks, and we just started just shooting through them the long way, just PPC bolts just going all the way through the tank and just vaporizing everything inside. And I'm like, yeah. Meanwhile, part of my brain is like, there was math involved. And I'm just, but yeah, it's really a lot of fun. And, some people like the tabletop, some people like the lore, some people like both. And I'm here for it all. Or I support it all. I'm not here for it all.
I feel like grade 2 for you when you were learning basic math must have been very traumatic.
No, I was fine with math until English started moving in. Once letters started shacking up with my numbers, like in pre-algebra, no.
Oh, yeah. As soon as that X and Y snuck in there, things became weird.
Exactly. I'm like, you hussy. It just,
Yeah, man. Imaginary numbers. Screw that.
Mm-hmm. And then, people like my housemate, who's an engineer, he's like, well, there's a point at which, all the math you learned in like high school, you get to like higher levels of education, and then you discover that math doesn't work anymore and it's kind of useless and irrelevant. And I'm like, what? And then, it just get, and he's like, and then you get past that and you get into like quantum stuff and the new math that you learn doesn't work anymore. And it's this whole new kind of math that you have to learn. I'm like, look, shut up. You're pissing me off. No, I won't have this.
Make up your mind, mathematicians.
Exactly.
You're ruining it for everybody. Grade 2 me, I understood the world. I could go to the store, I could buy something. I understood how tax worked. Now nothing makes sense anymore.
I understood that if I shoved my hand in a fire ant nest, it was going to sting a little. I learned that lesson a few times.
You went to the school of hard knocks, not the school of nerd math.
Right. Exactly.
Is that how you taught yourself math? So it's like there's a fire ant colony. One has like 1 ant. One has 5 ants. And if you put your hand in each, the one that hurts the most has the higher value. Is that how you learned?
Right. Exactly.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. And then it wasn't until I was like in my 40s that I learned that I'd been eating bananas upside down my entire life. It was just crazy.
Oh, man. It's a complicated world.
It is.
A complicated world, like the complicated world of BattleTech.
Oh, yes. That is probably a good subject for this particular podcast. I mean, it's not banana tech, Anyway.
Banana tech. Yeah. Spin off. Okay, we're going to do something with banana tech. That's too good. We'll do like a parody, like...
No, you can't do a pear. Pear is a different fruit.
Oh, God. Now we have 2 to do. No. Okay, well, so obviously when you're narrating a story, the perspective's a little bit different than reading it, but you do read your stories before you narrate them. We've talked about your process before. So of the stuff you've narrated in BattleTech, is there a story that you would say is your favorite?
I have been asked this question a couple of times, and a lot of times people are like, it's like asking who your favorite child is. Fortunately, I have a favorite child, and the rest of them can, just sit in the corner because I didn't write it. It's not really my story. But the one that I think I like the most, because I've always been a big fan of heists. Ocean's 11 is great. The entire TV series Leverage is awesome. I just love a good heist. And so for me, the story that I probably love the most is the one that I forgot the name of just now. No, it's Icons of War. I mean, like the Great Death Legion has some heist elements to it, and I really enjoyed those parts of them too, but it's not in and of itself a heist story. Whereas Icons of War pretty much is from the get-go. This group is supposed to get in there and steal this thing, and immediately things break down and everything falls apart, and they have to back off, basically go into hiding because the mission is still the same. Like the story covers like years that they have to replan and try again and again. And I'm like, this is cool. I really like this a lot. So yeah, definitely Icons of War for me, for my favorite.
And that sort of touches on one of the things that I like about the BattleTech universe is it is a really big scale. It sort of, a lot of the times it captures that big scale pretty well. So, it's not just your tiny little heist story, break it into a whatever. It's, this is a campaign. It takes years. It takes dozens of people working together to try and get this thing done. It's a fun scale to work at.
One of the other things that I also really liked about it was the fact that story, more than most of the others that I have ever listened to, it has, since it is a clan story, it deals with the other casts more than the warrior cast. And you don't get to see a lot of that. Almost all clan novels are focused on the warrior cast, and rightly so. It's BattleTech, of course. It's going to, feature the warrior cast more than any other. But one of the things I like about it, aside from just the fact that it's a heist thing, is that you get to see so much of the other cast and how like their layers of society work, and how the warriors that are kind of shoved in with them, how it starts to affect them and whatnot. And it's just a neat story development.
Well, I just purchased it right now because I haven't listened to that one yet. And I'm excited to listen to it. It can be cool to listen to something where the narrator was extra passionate about it. I'm excited to listen to you in this context now that I know that's your favorite.
And like the main character, Garmin Karinsky, is an elemental. So, of course, they have to do his voice like this, as one would with any elemental.
What?
No, I'm kidding.
Interesting choice. Going with the opposite, right? That's where the comedy comes in.
I was going to go full Daisy Duke, and I thought, no.
I'm an elemental.
Exactly. Starts sounding like that Rudolph from Rudolph Shiny New Year. I'm cute. No. Oh, that would be very painful.
So, with this in mind and your general narration experience, so when you're narrating, I'm really curious what your theater of the mind looks like. What does it look inside your head? What are you thinking about? What are you seeing? What are you experiencing?
It's kind of a pinkish gray, or maybe, well, yeah, it's pinkish gray with like, arteries and, oh no, not, okay, sorry. It really, I was thinking about this a lot. It depends on the author. Different authors focus on different things. Some are really good at describing setting. Others are really good at character. Some are really good at, like combat, like their combat, descriptors are really, really solid and you can feel every, punch, every hit, everything. And others are better at interpersonal relationships, describing those, and you can get connected with the characters very easily. So it kind of depends on the author and their particular style of writing. But I would say that, part of what I was thinking about with this earlier, somebody once asked me, am I more of a method actor or a character actor? I think ordinarily I would be more of a method actor, but with audiobook narration, because you have to jump back and forth between characters so much, you can't invest as much time and effort into getting into the skin of this character, because you're only going to be in there for a few seconds before you have to jump out to somebody else. And then the narrator may be a completely different voice altogether. And so the primary quote unquote character that you're performing as is this third person sort of amorphous perspective that the audience is supposed to be, or that you are speaking for the audience, to the audience, pick another prepositional phrase as well, between the audience, something, I don't know. You have to jump between all of these other supporting characters. That's a lot of character actor stuff. So you are basically right at the intersection of where method actors and character actors kind of operate. And for me, the theater of the mind aspect is really figuring out how the author is trying to communicate the story, trying to get into the author's headspace so that I can communicate their words as they intended without ever actually having talked to them about it, which is daunting sometimes at most. But you work with what you can. And so you make bold choices and move on.
I was going to say that was something I was going to ask about is when you're getting into the characters, how much of the character is what's in the text? How much is the character like what you have to sort of layer on top of, turn it into a voice? And how much carries over from like other books? If you do, record books that have the same character, how much does that carry over in your mind?
The funniest part about that is that sometimes you will start reading a story and there's a character that's right there from the beginning. And it may be 2/3 of the way through the book that finally, for the first time, the text specifically references how their voice sounds, what the texture and if they have an accent and everything. And you're like, oh God, now I have to back up and start all over again. I have to go and re-record all this stuff. And sometimes it's in the next book, because I did have one, it wasn't BattleTech. It was something, and it wasn't Shadowrun. It was something else. But I was like into the second book and it described this character's voice finally. And I'm like, oh my God, the first audiobook has already been published, and only now am I learning what this guy's supposed to sound like. Sometimes that happens. It happened with one character in BattleTech where it was a much smaller character, though, where I had been doing his voice a particular way because it really wasn't laid out for me in the text. The author had never really described it until like many chapters later. And I was just like, oh God, I'm so tired. Nobody's going to notice. I don't care, and I just kind of let it go. And I was like, if somebody mentions it, I'll think about changing it. And if they don't push too hard, I'll just be like, oopsie. Oh, well, we'll just chalk that up to a boo-boo. And now that I've said this, of course, they're going to know that I intentionally left it the way it was, even though I knew it was wrong. Anyway, it really kind of depends on, it always comes back to the author, because everything that a narrator does is the words on the page and the intent behind them. So figuring that out, which is part of the reason why I read the book all the way through beforehand, so that I have the maximum amount of information about all of the characters that I can possibly have before I get started.
There's this really fun BattleTech podcast out there called Of Mechs and Men. And right now they're going over the Grey Death trilogy.
Actually, they're done with that.
Oh yeah, I'm behind.
They finished it. They are in the Warrior trilogy right now. They're reading On Guard.
Oh yeah, the classics.
Because they're starting from the beginning and they're going all the way through in chronological order.
So the Grey Death Legion, when they're talking about your narration in it, they really compliment your commitment to the Scottish character a lot.
Oh God, yeah.
I remember I listened to that audiobook and I love the character as well.
Davis McCall, yeah.
You seem to be quite comfortable with accents, but I imagine, getting formal training in accents is one of those, it's hard to do.
It is.
So you probably just do your own research, get in there and commit to the role as much as you can. Is that sort of accurate?
Again, it depends. There's a lot of it depends. One thing that it depends on the accent, for one. There was a character in the third Great Death Legion book in The Price of Glory, right in the beginning, and I can't remember his name. It's like an Indian name. It's a very long name. It took me like 15 minutes of syllable by syllable saying it and then stitching it together to be able to say it properly, to be able to hear it so that I could recite it to myself until I could say it all in one chunk. But that was years ago, so I've forgotten how. But knowing that the character was Indian, I thought, okay, I should do an Indian accent. And the more I tried to do it, the more racist it felt. The longer I was doing it, I was like, I cannot do this. This is so wrong. I cannot do this. And the only reason I managed to get myself to pull it off was because they are all wearing these masks because they're on a planet that's 40 below Celsius. And so I have this microfiber cloth that I keep on top of my mic stand, and I had that balled up over my mouth so that it sounded muffled like I was wearing a mask. And so I felt that muffled it enough that it didn't feel as racist, but it still felt like, God, this is just horrible. And there have been other times where it has felt like I really should be very, very careful how I'm approaching this character. It just feels wrong. And a lot of times the only way that I can kind of make peace with it is to remember that this is like 1,300 years in the future or something like that. It's like you've got people living not just on different continents, in different star systems, hundreds of light years apart.
Yeah.
Yes, the accents are going to change over that distance and over that period of time. I mean, there are areas of Germany where you go 20 miles and nobody can understand each other. Imagine how much more it's going to be 1,000 years in the future across 300 light years. There are times where I worry about it and times where I don't. It really depends on the individual circumstance. But with regard to accents, there is a site out there called IDEA. It's the Internet
Dialect something archive.
Excellent archive.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we'll go with that. I can't believe I just forgot. Wow, I've referenced that thing so many times, and I just vapor locked on what the thing stands for. Anyway,
that's the effect of BungleTech on you.
Oh yes, probably so. But yeah, that thing, it's got like almost every single, like they have just blocks of text that they have gone and gotten people with all these different accents and dialects and everything to record them. Some of these recordings sound like they were made in cuneiform. Like it's on a wax cylinder that's 15,000 years old. And you're just like, what did he say? The text is there so you can read along with what he's saying, but it's like, that doesn't even sound like English at all. And it's just a really scratchy, hissy recording. And it's really hard to make out, but sometimes you can kind of get the gist of what the accent might sound like. And there are incredibly granular hundreds and hundreds of accents there, and they're very, very cool. So that's another good place that you could go to start if you wanted to.
I find it really silly, the concept of looking at the BattleTech Universe, so like Draconis Combine, they sound Japanese. The Steiners, they sound German. Those basic sort of tropes, because like you said, in Canada, we have a place called Newfoundland. And the accent there is extreme. And this is like one country. And now imagine like across friggin' the galaxies, like you say, everyone's going to sound so insanely different. The fact that we can still understand each other is amazing. And that must be because, the interstellar communications, actually, that would be so interesting. Because when the interstellar communications went down in Grey Monday and the BattleTech Universe, that would actually impact dialect.
A great deal.
That'd be a funny thing to do a play on. All of a sudden, people meet up and they just can't literally understand each other anymore. They're like, what are you saying? You speak English? What the heck?
And I think also we've got a lot of the, like when I'm narrating, if it's somebody like the higher ups, the nobles, the people who are, who can afford to take a jump ship pretty much anywhere they want to, they are going to be much more cosmopolitan. They will have more exposure to multiple star systems worth of stuff. And they also might be more purist about holding to the accents of their heritage. And so they are more likely to resist any drift. And so it's for me, it's okay that like the Steiners may still sound German as long as they're way up near the top of the social strata. But you start getting down into the more commonplace folks, and there you're going to start seeing a lot of drift because people just can't travel that much.
We should just make a commitment to make every low-class person sound like a redneck in the BattleTech universe, regardless where they're from.
You know, I kind of did that in the second Great Death Legion book. I made a lot of the yokels there on Brethandy sound a bit like this, and fortunately, not too many people complained about it. But yeah, it was a lot of that was like going back to my roots in Texas. So it was painful.
It's a fun accent. So we talked about it a little bit, but are there any particular techniques you leverage when you build characters or to get into character?
To get into character, yes. To build a character, most of that is done by the author. If there isn't, or if they haven't, if like the character is minor enough that they haven't really been fleshed out very much because the story doesn't require it, then I might construct something. But it depends on how much I like the character. There was, and I've forgotten his name again. It was in Forever Faithful near the end, one of the jump ship captains that I fell in love with this little guy. And I'm just like, oh, I would totally date you. Absolutely. What do I want you to, you need to sound smooth. I mean, smooth and just a little bit sarcastic, you know, just the kind of guy that I would really love to date. That's who I want you to be. And so I just kind of drew that voice out, and once I landed on the voice for him, I'm like, oh, hello, I like you. You're just okay. Don't fall in love with a guy who doesn't exist. Don't do that. Just chill. And that's if a character isn't fleshed out for it. To get into a character, some of them are really tough. Some of them are characters that you are supposed to not like, but they need to be engaging. I mean, it's like when you play a villain. Yeah, you're supposed to hate them, but they still need to be relatable. The best villains are always relatable. You can understand, no matter how horrible it might be, you can understand their motivation and where it comes from. It's like, okay, this guy is trying to kill all these people, but this is why. And I mean, if I were pushed to this limit, I could kind of, maybe I won't tell anybody that I could, yeah, okay, whatever. But there are times where you need to draw on parts of yourself that might be really not nice and kind of bring them into the sun a little bit and let them shine through. And then as soon as you're done with them, put them back in their box and bury them back where they were because you hate that part of yourself.
So for myself, I leverage physicality a lot to build my characters and distinguish my characters. I'm wondering how important that is for you when you are representing a character.
I mean, you might as well just copy paste every time I say it depends, because it depends. If the character, it depends on how boisterous they are. If you're dealing with a character who's fairly reserved and they are not given to wild exaggerations of statement or complaining, shouting, getting angry, stuff like that, they tend to be very quiescent, then the physicality is not that necessary. Or it is so restrained that you are basically sitting with your back ramrod straight and your hands clasped in front of you like something that would be like that. Anyway, it's just.
Did you narrate Paul Moon? You did, right? Because you did Forever
Yes,
Faithful.
yes, I did.
Okay, so can we break down two different characters completely different?
I break down every day. Sorry.
Now you're gonna break down live on a recording.
No, I'm not.
So let's talk about the physicality you would apply for Grayson and the physicality you would apply for Paul. Completely different, distinct characters. Like they're built differently. Their attitudes are different. Is that something we can do?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's break it down for us.
For example, Paul Moon, just to start with him, just because I absolutely love Paul Moon. He's just awesome. I love doing elemental characters because their voices are so deep. For him, I tend to kind of roll my shoulders forward a little more to try to just expand my thoracic cavity, just spread my ribs out as much as I can to make the biggest resonating chamber that I can. But at the same time, I try to crane my neck up and back because he is a very proud man, and pride in both his own accomplishments and in his love for his clan. And so that always shines through, sometimes to his detriment, but he doesn't really care that much that it might be to his detriment because he's clan. This is how we are. It's like, if you don't like it, either leave or, declare a trial and let's end this right now. I'll just snap your neck and I win. So The physicality is, even though he can be very stoic, you still want to literally expand your resonating chamber like you're a guitar or whatever. You want to swell it out as big as you can so you get as much of that, not just depth, but a resonance to his voice, because that's important. That also helps deliver some of the character. It's also very likely that I would record Paul Moon standing up, just because if I'm sitting down, internal organs and stuff are kind of squished a little bit, and you don't want that. You want to stand up so you have everything as wide open as possible. For Grayson, his voice is higher. Doesn't sound childish, but it's much more in my own natural register. And so sitting is fine, because sometimes with him, I need to slouch a little bit, make everything feel much more relaxed, and kind of guy he doesn't necessarily have a problem with authority, but he's just, sometimes the rules are just a little bit chill. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, we could do that, but we could also do something fun. And so their personalities kind of shine through in that Grayson is more laid back than Paul Moon is, and as such, his posture might be a little bit softer than Paul's is.
I find that to be a really interesting choice to stand for one character and sit for the other. When I myself narrate or do voiceover, I'm always standing. But there's a physicality to that.
Yeah.
And I haven't thought about, well, maybe I should, I have a standing stool. I should lean. I should lean on those relaxed characters. Why not? Adopt that physicality, because that's just, why throw that tool away when we're built with it, right?
Exactly. Experiment with it. See how it comes out.
Very cool.
Something that struck me as you were talking through that is, you're talking about the details of voice acting and stuff, but all of this is very backed by like what I would consider a really deep knowledge of these characters and of the universe, which I guess, you've built up over a dozen or so books that you've narrated. But how much of that did you have to do before the first time? Like, I guess you got into the universe with the Harebrained Schemes one. So how much preparation did you need to do to learn about the universe before you started into it?
Well, with the Harebrained Schemes game, I was originally slated to do the voice of Mastiff, who is kind of your mentor at the beginning of the game. And then right before, like 2 or 3 days before we started recording, they were like, actually, we found somebody else we like better for Mastiff, so we would rather you play the villain, Santiago Espinosa. And I'm like, oh, darn. I get to play the villain? What a shame. And so I still didn't know anything about who is this faction, and like, oh, they're out in the periphery. And I'm like, I understood what the periphery is. I mean, I played MechWarrior 1 a little bit. I played MechWarrior 2 a lot. I loved MechWarrior 3. It was great. And then beyond that, I just kind of had moved on to other things, but I always loved, MechWarrior. And then eventually people were like, well, what about BattleTech? And I'm like, what's the difference? And like, oh, they're completely different things. And I'm like, I don't think they are. And like, no, they're not even the same game. And I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure that MechWarrior takes place in the BattleTech universe. And they're like, no, they're totally unrelated. I'm like, no, they're not. The way IPs work, you can't call it this if they're in. Anyway, so I learned a bit about the periphery and the inner sphere, more about the periphery, because a lot of the MechWarrior games tend to take place in the periphery, not much in the inner sphere that I experienced. So I had a little bit of lore, just a tiny little taste, a small sampling of it, if you will, when they were like, here, we want you to do this character. And I'm like, okay, what's he like? And like, oh, he's, and then they gave me character descriptors. I'm like, and I used that to read the script with that kind of character in mind. I'm like, okay, I've got an idea. And so I gave them what I thought it was. And they're like, all right, this is good, but let's tweak it this way just a little bit. We don't want the accent to be quite that thick. I'm like, okay. And so we just narrowed it down until we got what they wanted. And then we recorded the whole thing. And then, my part in it was done, and they went on and made it. Eventually it got released. And then a year or two later, John Helfers was like, hey, do you want to narrate a BattleTech novel? And I'm like, okay. Sure. Yeah. Whatever. I'd already been narrating other stuff. I'd been narrating for podcasts and a couple of, young adult books, not the Dragon Riders of Pern, but it was a Dragon Riders style thing. And so I was like, yeah, sure. I'll give it a shot. And
sure, I guess
from that point on, that's where I started scooping up what lore, and knowledge I have about the universe was all gleaned from when I was narrating these books. And I'm like, ooh, wait a minute. So that's oh shit. Okay. Wow. That's crazy. And I would turn to John and be like, with regard to this thing, like, it's like we're getting ready to do a D&D stream and we're like in the green room while, the DM is talking to the chat and everything on Twitch. And I'm talking to John back in the room. I'm like, so this thing, does that mean that these people way over here are doing this other stuff? And he's like, no. I'm like, uh-oh. Okay. Oh, crap. Okay, so what about these folks? Yes, they are. They are doing that, but they're also doing this. I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, you'll get that when you get to this book. I'm like, how far away is that? And he's like, that's like 2 books down the road. I'm like, oh, God. How am I going to learn all this stuff? He's like, welcome to my world. Just like, oh, no.
And I guess it was easier for your introduction because you were just playing one character, so you can get the notes for this character. But once you get into the books and you have to swap between these, you have to come up with all these different characters yourself based on the author's writing.
Yeah. If you're doing video games, you usually do 1, maybe 2 characters, unless you're George Ledoux. And then you wind up doing like almost every single character in one of the games that he did. That poor bastard. Anyway, but yeah, it's like when you get towards doing audiobooks and whatnot, suddenly you have to do them all. And I'm like, oh, this is worse than regular voice acting. I had no idea it was going to be this intense. Okay, no, that's fine. I can handle this. Wait a minute. I'm doing the voices of these 16 people in the same room talking to each other. Oh, no. Yeah, it can be really, really challenging.
With that in mind, is there any character choice you've made that if you had a magic redaction wand, you would wave and change retroactively?
Yes, absolutely. One in particular, and it only really just came up recently. Several of the last 3 or 4, I guess, audiobooks that I've narrated has had like an introduction by Randolph P. Checkers, Esquire. And I've just been doing some voice for the thing. And after the last book that I did, I think it was right after I'd finished narrating Hour of the Wolf or whatever one I did before that. And I was watching one of the YouTube videos that Tex from the Black Pants Legion was doing. And somebody mentioned, yeah, your character, Randolph P. Checkers. I'm like, what? And I didn't know it was his character, his in-universe character. I'm like, oh, God, no. And so I was talking to him, off just privately through private message. I'm like, dude, is this your character? I've been doing it with this other voice. I mean, I could have at least tried to make it sound like you. God damn it. I wish I'd known that from the beginning. I would have done the character totally differently. And he's like, dude, it's fine. Don't worry about it. It is what it is. Just let it go. I'm like, no, you don't understand. Okay. I don't care what anybody else says. You are the voice of BattleTech. God damn it. And this character needed to sound like you. And he's like, chill.
What was the voice you used?
It wasn't quite like Devlin Stone. It was like if Devlin Stone weren't suffering liquefaction, that would probably be what I'm trying to. Now, if I don't have the words in front of me, I can't think of anything that this character has said. So I'll just go with one of David Bowie's lines from Labyrinth because I think it'll be funny. And he's like, everything you wanted, I have done. You asked the child be taken, I took him. You cowered before me, I was frightened. And that sounds nothing like Tex at all. And I'm just like, oh God, no, I should have done this totally differently.
Maybe that's how Tex wants to sound, though. Have you asked Tex that? Have you asked, in your ideal state, what do you want to sound like? Maybe he doesn't like to have this deep baritone voice.
Anyway, every time I talked to him about it, which was like 3 or 4 times, he was like, stop worrying about it. It is what it is. If I had $1 for every time he has told me it is what it is, I could probably afford a proper vocal booth by now. And it was just, anyway, yeah, I love that man.
Well, I think that in his next video, Tex should do your voice.
Oh, God.
He should use your rendition of him and he should just slowly migrate to what you thought Tex was unintentionally. I like it.
Yeah, somehow I don't think that's going to happen. It would be funny, but also a little weird.
We embrace the weird here in BungleTech.
Mm-hmm.
So BattleTech is big, narrating is hard, but is there anything in particular unique in the BattleTech universe that you find extra challenging?
I think this probably touches a lot on what we were talking about earlier, about how the tabletop game is pretty much exclusively just combat, and everything else, all of the lore and everything is much more narrative and huge. It's a gigantic universe, and the two very rarely overlap. And I think that is I mean, even with something like, Warhammer 40K, it feels like the integration between the two is stronger, that the lore kind of interleaves with the tabletop game a lot more than it does, or it seems to, than it does with BattleTech. And whereas in this case, they're two very distinct, separate things. They're connected, but they don't overlap that much. And so I think it's a lot of fun and challenging, as you mentioned, when I run into people who have been playing the game for a long time and are like just now or just recently starting to either read the books, or they've been reading the books and they've heard that, oh wait, we're doing unabridged audiobooks now. Okay, I will go back and check those. And either they purchase the unabridged novels or they get the unabridged audiobooks and wind up listening to the stuff that I've done. And for some of them who have, talked to me about it after the fact, that it has expanded their appreciation of the tabletop game in ways that they didn't realize it would. And I think that's very, very cool.
Yeah, that's very cool. That's something that Nathan and I have talked about, because we're both the sort of people, we like to sort of place the game in a universe. I like to sort of, visualize what's happening on the battlefield, and Nathan likes to try and figure out how people would end up here. What contrived situation could this particular battle be taking place under? And yeah, like I think BattleTech has a lot of that potential. It is a really rich universe, and so it adds a lot to the game beyond it just being a fun tabletop game.
Yeah, watching people online, like on Twitch playing like MechWarrior 5 or something, and they go to some star system and there's a couple of missions available for them there, and people are like, okay, go and defend the city or go and destroy this thing. And I'm like, okay, let's recurse one level here. Why do you want me to do that? What has happened? Very much like what you were talking about. What has happened that you want this building destroyed? Or what is here that is so important that people are coming to either blow it up or take it from you? These are just interesting, delicious little nuggets of lore that I'm like, I need to know about that. And of course, a lot of people are like, no, that's classified. You don't need to know what's here. You just need to do your mercenary duty and just blow these people up.
You're a mercenary. Use guns. Solve problems.
Exactly. Exactly right.
Yeah, I think one thing that sort of comes to mind when you're talking about this sort of separation between the lore and the classic BattleTech rules, Michael and I and our group, we play with the advanced rules, and I'm a big fan of them. And I actually think the advanced rules are more aligned to the narrative storytelling in BattleTech than the classic rules are. For example, there's something called like jump jet attack. And this is something where you can literally burn someone with your jump jets. And this was implemented because from one of the Jade Falcon books, I think it was called I Am Jade Falcon or whatever. It was from that book, like a specific technique that was implemented in there. Then like, okay, well, we got to create an advanced rule for this. So for me, I think that I do agree that I really think that like just with the basic rules, the classic rules of BattleTech, what you'd see in Total Warfare, to me, it takes out the personality of the pilot. It takes out the person in the mech. And I feel like the more comprehensive, you can start looking at source books, you can start looking at advanced rules, and then you can build the lore up around the game. But where the game starts, it tends to be just robots smashing each other. And, I understand that BattleTech's complicated, it's really big, so there's no real good way to enter the universe. And, lots of people enter from the fiction, lots of people enter from the video games. And lots of people enter from, the tabletop. There's so many different paths in. Maybe I start with the tabletop, then, I'm going to read a book. Oh, Tren Sparks, I hear he's a great narrator. I'm going to listen to one of his books, et cetera, et cetera. And you slowly can just start building things more, because the most seasoned players that I've played with, they're so embedded in lore that even if they're just playing with the basic rules or the standard rules, they still see a story behind the scenes, even though they don't necessarily know how to express it. They just naturally have this sort of emotional connection, and they sort of, laugh, oh, well, of course this happened to Allow, blah, 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 which is built upon that narrative background framework of the BattleTech universe. But that's really interesting that you've had that sort of challenge of the contrast between that separation.
And while you were describing that, it brought an idea to mind. What about the possibility of people who are playing the tabletop game? When you mentioned, you basically take the pilot out of it, they're just machines that are beating the crap out of each other. Do you think that people would play with as much ferocity and abandon if the person was somebody that they had spent time building, given them a personality, if it was somebody that they cared about enough that they didn't want to lose them because they spent all this time building this character up and making a character background for them, a personality for them, made them a real person that's in that cockpit. Now suddenly there's something you don't want to lose. It's not just a piece of hardware that you can replace on the next round.
Well, exactly. And funnily enough, our last episode, we were talking about role-playing in the BattleTech universe. And I think with that question, that all comes down to how committed a role player I think you are in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. The natural instinct is to pull back. But I think that's not necessarily a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
It depends on what you want in your games. But definitely, I think you're right. The intro, the standard is just sort of robots fighting on the battlefield. But the interesting part is, I think, I have to thank you as a narrator. I have to thank all the writing that's out there, because the reason I see this story behind everything is because I'm so ingrained in the lore from reading this stuff, from listening to this stuff, that now I can't not see it anymore. But if someone's just getting in, what are they doing? I'm a big 100-ton mech with a skull on its face. Bang, bang, I'm winning. Yay. Cool. So, obviously, you're not just a BattleTech voice actor. You are a voice actor. So, do you have a particular accomplishment that is non-BattleTech related, that is voiceover related, that you are the most proud of?
Wow. It's tangential to BattleTech and ultimately led to BattleTech with Harebrained Schemes. I think it was 2014 when Harebrained Schemes released Shadowrun Hong Kong, and my DM was in Seattle at their offices playing it on release day, and all of us friends of his who were voice actors were basically Skyped into his computer because they don't often put voice acting in their Shadowrun games. And so we were doing the voiceover live. We were reading all the lines live while he was playing. And Mitch was sitting next to him, and we get to the very first character that I wound up doing a voice for. And it was an orc cop named Duncan Wu. And his very first line in the game is, "Well, don't you look like shit?" And if you watch the YouTube video, you'll see Mitch kind of like adjust, his position in the seat and kind of smile and, shift his headphones around and look off camera at somebody and smile and nod. And I was like, yeah, got him, which was ultimately what led to me getting the part in the game for BattleTech. But I think before that, way back in not 2000, back in like 1998, I was working on a kids show in San Jose called Adventures with Kangarati. And I was taking the videotapes that we'd been recording for the day to the trailer to put them in the vault. And the director was talking to the guy who is like a triple black belt in everything I can think of. And he's the guy that usually wears the kangaroo costume. And, we have the kids learning whatever lesson, like patience or friendship or whatever. And she's trying to get him to do a voice. She's like, look, I know you can do this voice. Just try. And he's like, no, I don't do voices. I just do the bodysuit thing. That's all I do. I just do that. And when I came back through, I'm like, what are you trying to do? She's like, I want him to do the robot from Lost in Space. And I was like, no, it's easy. You just, Danger Roy Orbison. And she's like, that's the voice I want. And James is like, yeah, get him to do it. And he like runs out of the trailer. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so we wind up in the booth, recording the dialogue. And she stops me about halfway through. And she's like, have you ever considered doing this for a living? And I was like, no, not really. And she's like, you should. And that was kind of what first planted the seed for me that I should consider doing this, for a living. And it was another 10 years before somebody else told me that. And at that point I was like, all right, I'll do it. I'll shift into voice acting. And that's when that was 2009 when I made that shift. And I haven't looked back. It's like, this is the best job I've ever had. I will absolutely stick with this for the rest of my days.
Tren Sparks' origin story. It all started with Kangarati.
It did.
That's very cool.
That's crazy. And I think there's something, speaking about a similar experience I've had in terms of not doing anything about it and then hearing it again, then getting into it. It's quite the leap to take. It can be quite intimidating. So I'm happy that you took the jump, good sir.
Me too.
Because you've gifted us all.
I wish I'd done it sooner. I could have done it right after I got out of the Army in like 1991, because I lived in northern Texas, very, very close to where Funimation is. And, they did a lot of the English dubs for a lot of anime that came into America. And it was just 20 miles away. I could have gone down there and done that, but I hate anime voices. It's not true. I don't hate them. I find a lot of them grating.
That's fair. It's a very fair assessment. So if you showed up at Funimation in the 90s and done your hard-boiled half-orc cop voice, you don't think they would have gone for it?
They might have, and then I'd have been typecast into that forever, which could have been fine.
Fair enough.
But I'm not really good at the lip flap improv, because the same sentence in Japanese and English have remarkably different numbers of syllables. Wait, I need to make it look like I'm saying how many words, but still communicate only this? Oh, God.
Another skill set.
Yeah, and that's one I never perfected.
Yeah, dubbing is a very extremely challenging constraint for the actor. Definitely.
That is not in my bailiwick, and I am often very impressed with people who do it, because that ain't me.
That's what's great about narration, though, too, is that the canvas is open. It's wide. There's no time constraint. You can just be and go and naturally express your emotions as a character. I mean, that's an amazing story. That's so cool. That's how you got in. Oh, yeah, that's radical. But what is your proudest BattleTech voiceover accomplishment?
I keep coming back to this, and in a way it feels kind of petty, but it was in A Bonfire of Worlds. That's the one where the precentor, the guy who's in charge of Prefecture 10, gets Tucker's sister to bring him up to the top of this building where the guy is sitting eating breakfast. And he's like dipping his toast into his runny curried eggs. And he's like looking at Tucker. He's like, do you want any breakfast? Would you like something? And Tucker's watching him do this and watching this guy eat. And it's like turning his stomach, watching this thing. So that's the emotion that I want to convey. That's what I want the audience to feel. So I went to the kitchen and I made some toast, and I came back and sat down. And while I'm doing this character's lines, I'm eating toast while he's talking, because that's what he's doing in the story. And one of the people who left a review was like, nobody wants to hear that. Just the chewing and the swallowing. And I'm like, yay, I got him. That's exactly what you're supposed to feel. And I'm like, I shouldn't be this proud of that. That's, the guy is genuinely, this is something that he doesn't like, and I'm taking pride in that. Okay, whatever.
Sometimes, you have to engage with challenging media, and, you produce some challenging, difficult to digest media.
Yeah, especially curried eggs. I don't want to digest that at all. That's not true. I had chicken tikka masala last night, so I love curry. But yeah, aside from that, as much as I rail against it, because I honestly find it genuinely kind of embarrassing. And there are some people on this podcast who keep doing it all the time, saying that I am the voice of BattleTech and that I am the god of BattleTech. It just makes me feel so awkward. And it's just like, because I get hit with imposter syndrome a lot. People are like, oh my God, I absolutely love this thing. It's like, why? But, when I first joined the furry fandom way back in the 90s, and, I ran into all these artists who were drawing all this art that I thought was so damn cool. And I ran into them and I started fanboying, and they're like, dude, I'm just this guy. Okay, chill. So I understand now what they're going through. And I was like, oh God, it's okay. I can handle this. And then John Helfer starts saying, but you are the voice of battle. I'm like, no, shut up. I can't have people from, Catalyst telling me that God. So it is a point of pride, but it is also very uncomfortable in a lot of ways. So I'm always kind of riding the balance point between resisting and accepting. And it's just,
Have you ever considered just letting it go to your head?
I have. There is a part of me that really likes that idea, who is a conceited, arrogant prick. And I don't like him. And I don't want to feed him. And so I'm like, you know what? No, you can't have this. You may not have this. You are not allowed to have this. Like the old Native American saying, the one you feed. That's a wolf I'm not feeding.
As long as you don't get it tattooed on your body, I think you're fine.
Oh. Uh-oh. Yeah.
Let's get it made into a flower or something. I don't know.
They have laser removal for that now, right?
Right.
Hey, this is a big question. This is a challenging question, and this is a personal question.
Oh, no.
As actors, we have to know our value. We have to know our place. We have to know
your place.
we need to, yes, as Michael says, know your place. We need to have confidence because, as actors, we throw a lot of auditions out. People don't really understand the process, how hard it can be, and how much there is that balance with ego, keeping that under control to actually be able to produce genuine work. So when you reflect on yourself genuinely and honestly, and you think of your performances and your capacities, what do you think makes you special, unique, and valuable?
I would say my ability to extrapolate the emotional context of a scene, to read a novel and in a way translate it to a stage script in my head so that I have setting, I have stage direction, I have the emotional context of the scene, I have character motivation, and I have it kind of all broken down and laid out in my head so that even if I don't have a particular voice for a particular character yet, at least I understand why they are acting the way they are. And if I don't understand it, then it may mean that, again, as conceited as it can be, it may mean that there is something wrong with the story. And so that is a point where when I'm doing my pre-read and I'm assembling a list of words that I'm like, I want to make sure that I know how to pronounce this properly according to the gatekeepers of the lore. You tell me how this is pronounced. And again, this feels conceited sometimes to say. A lot of times when I'm narrating something, somebody who doesn't know the lore, this is the first time they're going to hear this word spoken aloud. And I want to make sure that if I'm telling somebody this is how it's supposed to be pronounced, that the people who write this shit are the ones who have told me this is how it's pronounced. So I've got it right. And if somebody comes to me and says, you pronounce this wrong, I could point to Catalyst and say, hey, talk to them. That's what they said it was supposed to be. So, if it's wrong, it's their fault, not mine. But aside from the pronunciations, there is also anytime I find typos or plot inconsistencies, which every now and again I do find. Folks like John, they have got a tremendous amount of content that they have to read through, and they read very, very quickly. I read very slowly. I read at the speed at which I narrate, and a lot of times I'm mouthing the words so that I get a sense of how it's going to feel to say it later on. And so I spot things that slush readers and whatnot will miss because they tend to read very quickly. And so if I'm like, this doesn't make any sense, is it possible that this is wrong? Or I will spot a complete contradiction in the plot between chapter 13 and chapter 2. And I point that out to John. He's like, oh, yeah, we'll fix that. And then like a week or two later, he comes back. He's like, yep, that should be this. And so I would say it is my ability to contextualize and analyze the thing and the story, the narrative, the character progression and their motivations, and piece it all together so that I can figure out exactly how I need to perform it to get the story told the way it should be told, or seems like it should be told by the author.
Let's look back in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think that comes from?
Grade
2, basic math.
Sticking your hands in the ants now.
Well, yeah, the ants helped a lot.
Ants always help. They're very helpful.
They are. I mean, look at Marvel. They're incredibly useful. Wow, that is a really interesting question that I have never considered.
We're all about deep introspection here at BungleTech Co.
Yeah, it would seem so. It's kind of disturbing.
Because it's developed to a state where it's innate now in you, right? This is something that is an innate capacity that you now have that you bring to life just through your reading, through your vocalization of words. Because some skills are trained, some skills are, environmental, situational. Sometimes it's just the way you are. Maybe you're just the god of BattleTech.
I think what it probably is, what it probably came from was when I was, in middle and high school, and I was constantly reading things like the Spellsinger series. I was reading, Michael Moorcock. I was reading all about Elric of Melniboné, I think, the guy who carried Stormbringer, excuse me. And then reading the Guardians of the Flame series, like the Sleeping Dragon and whatnot by Joel Rosenberg. And then also Tolkien and Zelazny and Spider Robinson and all these different authors that had very disparate styles of writing, but I still had the ability to kind of unplug my brain from this world and lose myself in what I was reading, to the point that it was almost like I was standing in the midst of this story while it was going on, and I could just see it unfolding around me, and I could get a sense of where there were holes in characters. It's like, why would he do this? When, I mean, if he's supposed to be as smart as he is, he should have known that there was another way, because I just thought of another way out of this. Why didn't he? And sometimes that was because it's a plot contrivance. It needs to happen that way for the story to move forward. And so there are times where there are sacrifices that you have to make in writing a story. And there were times where I thought I wanted to be a writer, and I'm okay in very short vignettes. But if I can't finish whatever I'm writing in a day, I will lose interest and never go back to it. My ability to completely immerse myself, not just in a single character's perspective, but to immerse myself in the world and watch all of the characters around me behaving in their own individual ways, and being able to sit back and analyze, okay, so if I've got this right, then the situation that's unfolding right now, this character's probably going to do this. And if it happens that way, I know I've analyzed this character properly. And if it doesn't, I know I've missed something that either hasn't been revealed yet, or I missed it and I need to go back and reread it. So it again comes back to the whole analytical thing, but it was fantasy novels that I read when I was a kid. Since we were talking about math, it was algebra class, because I wasn't paying attention to the work I was supposed to be doing because there were letters in my arithmetic problems. I was reading a book called The Folk of the Air by Peter S. Beagle. And there's a scene where they're like at a LARP, and the guys are all sitting there, they've got their foam axes and they're hiding behind a log, and it's real foggy outside, and like these Vikings start coming through the fog towards them. And one of the guys sees these people coming forward and he just screams, "Raiders!" And I was up out of my chair, threw the book down. I was like, and I looked at everybody in the classroom is staring at me like I'm crazy. And I'm just like, it's a really good book, sorry. And I just picked it up, and the teachers just look at me, and she's just shaking her head. And I just sat down, I put the book away and started pretending like I gave a damn about the homework. And oh yeah, I was in that book. Oh man, that was so great.
Got the prequel to the origin story of Tren Sparks.
Tren Sparks, for the last time, you snap to attention, take things more seriously, and shove your hand in that fire ant's nest and determine that X variable.
Right.
No, that's very cool, and it's I think it's awesome that you've landed in BattleTech, because it's a universe that skill like really pays off. Like there's so much to bring to life, so it's super cool to have you working on these stories.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
So this has been amazing. You were amazing. The God voice of BattleTech. Oh my God, the God voice of BattleTech.
Shut up.
He does this to me too.
Uh-huh.
So if you just see him on the street, just remember, get on your knees, raise your hands in the air.
No, don't do
God
that.
voice of Battle.
No.
No. Do it for BungleTech. Don't do it for Tren. Okay? You're listening to my podcast.
Okay.
I'm the boss.
Okay. Look at me. I'm the podcaster now.
But this has been amazing. This has been a lot of cool insights. Thank you for being so
Absolutely.
open and sharing this stuff with us, especially the ants. The ants is a crazy.
As long as your check clears, that's fine.
And if you're not on Twitter, where can people catch up with you?
Well, I'm just gotten into Blue Sky, but of course it's still in beta, so it hasn't really been released yet. So good luck finding that. You could probably, I mean, we mentioned the D&D, tabletop game live streams and Shire Adventures. Those you can either watch on Twitch at Arvin Elleron's channel, and same thing on YouTube, which is where the videos get posted after we do the live stream. So you could definitely watch it there, and you see a lot of me there. Aside from that, I mean, Audible's really until, Blue Sky, and yeah, I don't think there's really anything else that looks tempting right now. Until that goes live, your best bet is to just try to catch me on Twitch.
All right, well, I'll grab those links from you and I'll share them in the podcast description so people can find you with a simple click. It's almost like it's magic.
It is magic.
It's magic if we were in the 80s.
Well, I mean, or the 1880s.
Whoa, no, then it's witchcraft in the 1880s.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Because everybody is like, how are you doing this? And it's like, may the peace of Blake be with you. And they're like, may a piece of cake be with me? It's like, yes, that's what I said. May a piece of cake be with you. Happy birthday.
Oh, man, that's another good thing to pun. Another pun.
Uh-huh.
Opportunity.
Uh-huh.
Damn, too much good content. It limitlessly flows out of you, Tren.
Yeah, well, I try to bandage those because they get weepy and they just horrible ichor seeks out. It's just,
All right, well, thank you so much.
Sure.
Michael, how amazing was this? How amazing is Tren?
Tren is pretty cool. Extremely radical.
Extremely radical. Michael only says what he means. He can't lie because I put a chip in his head when he was sleeping a few weeks ago.
Is it a tortilla or is it like a Dorito?
It is definitely one of those Dorito, what are they called? Dorito roulettes. The one that sometimes might be spicy, might not be. Yeah, sometimes you get a spicy Michael.
Ooh, nice.
All right, thank you.
No problem. I was really happy to come on and be here. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for coming on. It was great talking to you.
Tertiary objective. Battlefield Outcome Report segment. Initiating.
This is INN Boots on the Ground reporter Nathaniel Smithson reporting from Tantara. We are now entering the 7th day of quiet in the capital as members of the St. Ives Compact continue negotiations with representatives from House Lao. For now, there is no end in sight for the ceasefire, and it seems an enduring peace may be settling in. But don't tune out just yet. We at INN have prepared a special entertainment segment to share with you. A cautionary tale set in ancient pre-fusion Terra. A story of hubris, divinity, and sensuality. Without further ado, presenting live on INN.
The howling wind carved drifts of caked snow across the prairie outside. It was another chilling and lonesome day in Alberta. Michael sat within the warm sanctuary of his home, his sole company an eager, crackling fire chattering away in the background.
Well, I'll say, it certainly is a cold one today.
He said as he tightened the waistband on his purple velvet-trimmed housecoat, a puff of smoke coiling from his antique ivory pipe.
How shall I amuse myself tonight? Perhaps a spot of electronic gaming, a Twitch stream with a cold tumbler of ginger ale, or perusal through Sarna, or...
He hesitated as he eyed the book on his side table, his voice quivering. He dare not say the words.
Sarna it is. There is much to learn. A MechWarrior must, after all, be educated.
As the sounds of his modem dialing and connecting to the interweb echoed throughout his house, his free hand caressed his RKS 100-86 mouse. His eagerness neared climax as the web page began to load.
Good evening, Michael.
A displaced yet powerful voice spoke, yanking Michael from his anticipated pleasure with shock.
Who's there?
You know who I am, Michael, and you have always known this day would come. Now, look inside. Who do you know me to be?
God? Is that you?
Yes, Michael. It is God, the God of the most stupendous universe of them all, the God of BattleTech.
What? Why are you here? What do you want?
You know what I want, Michael, just as you knew this conversation would one day come.
But...
His mouth salivated, his throat parched, a mixture of anxiety and desire welling up within him.
The time is now, Michael. It is time for you to finally experience my scriptures. It is time for you to read BattleTech fiction.
But there isn't enough time. Sarna has everything you need, carefully summarized and indexed for you to...
No, Michael, no. It is time for you to no longer depend on the wisdom of others. You must no longer be afraid to experience me yourself.
Within his most private cavern of thought, fear resided, a deep, poking fear. He stammered as the knot around his house coat suddenly felt taut.
But God, I have experienced it. A mech warrior such as myself seeks knowledge above all else, and there is no knowledge greater than that can be found on www.sarna.net.
Enough, Michael. Enough of your mindful yammering and excuses. It is not knowledge that you lack. It is experience. An experience of the infinite vastness of my scriptures, of my canon, of my lore. Sarna is indeed expansive. Sarna is indeed glorious. But it is built upon the shared experience of my followers along their journey. And now, it is your time to complete a journey of your own as well.
Michael stuttered as he grasped at slippery justifications.
I don't have the time. There's too much to do. And I'm not even that big into BattleTech.
You cannot lie to me, Michael. I am the BattleTech zeitgeist made manifest. Cogito ergo proelium tech. I am BattleTech. And therefore, little fan, I am you.
As a mech warrior whose intelligence was only rivaled by his sensualness, Michael innately understood God's meaning. So innately, as a matter of fact, that he failed to see the need to ask for elaboration on his statement further.
But there is too much. I'm so lost and far behind. Where would I start? When could I start? How do I start?
It is far simpler than your beautiful mind perceives it. Now, Michael. Now. N-O-W. No options wrong. For my sake, Michael, you run a BattleTech podcast. Now!
Although your acronym is pithy and marginally grammatically correct, I'm afraid
I know, Michael. I know you feel like once you experience the glorious stories told within, their climaxes will make you feel small in comparison.
In tune with the tumultuous mix of extremely strange emotions contained within Michael, God spoke kindly, in a voice connected to intention, as if flowing from a seasoned voice actor.
Yet, I promise you, you too can be a hero appreciated by your people as glorious, kind, and wise as even the rightful First Lord of the Star League, Catherine Steiner Davion.
The wind peaked in a howl as it buffeted his house's gold-trimmed windows. At the noise, Michael's hand quivered, shaking free ashes from his pipe, which landed on his toned mech warrior calves.
I have always dreamed of being as kind a person as Catherine. Could it be possible?
Yes, Michael. Yes. If you trust me and commit to reading my scriptures, it will be a first step in that direction.
I'll do it. If not for me, then for Catherine.
Good, Michael. I see your heart is firm with resolution. Now, repeat after me, and by doing so, affirm your commitment to reading my scriptures. Selah.
That word's a little bit loaded, and I don't see it as particularly necessary for me to...
Repeat after me, Michael.
Selah.
And in uttering that word, Michael committed from that day forth to read the scriptures of the BattleTech God, voiced by Tren Sparks. He leaned over, grabbed Star-Lord from his gold-encrusted, velvet-trimmed side table, and stroked the binding sensually before purring resolutely.
My experience in the expansive and high-quality lore of BattleTech finally begins this evening.
Well, listeners, wasn't that entertaining? Be sure to tune back in tomorrow for further updates on the conflict or more tantalizing stories. This is Nathaniel Smithson, boots on the ground, always first on the scene.
Secondary objective, rule check discovery segment. Initiating.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our Rule Check Discovery segment. Today, we're talking about jumping. Glorious, glorious jump jetting. The only thing that can defeat moonfog. And we're going to talk about our mistakes that we've been making with jump jetting. And there have been quite a few. Why, Michael? Why are we like this?
Well, some of these are things that I was just taught when I started playing with you. So I take no responsibility for these ones.
So, you're placing blame on me.
Yes. Entirely. 100%.
Isn't that a flaw in your character, to trust me? Or perhaps it is a compliment of my character to be so trustworthy.
You know, I hadn't thought about it that way. Really, you're right. I am wrong for not just reading the rules myself, because I should have known better. I know you, Nathan, and I should know you don't know anything.
Listeners. Michael is speaking the truth. Always remember this when you take anything in this podcast into context.
They have rule checked our rule checks before, so they are taking us with the correct number of grains of salt.
That's the great thing about having a podcast, that the theme is making mistakes, because you can never be wrong. I guess if we're right too much, we're wrong. But we don't have that problem.
Yep, we just need some dodgy long-term memory, and we'll just keep falling back into the same mistakes over and over again.
Thank goodness. Infinite content generation. So, what's the first mistake we were making?
So the first one was jump jetting after standing. And I think this comes probably from like an imprecise understanding of how movement points, movement types, and standing up work. Because technically, before you stand up, you must declare whether you are using standing movement points or running movement points. That's sort of the way the BattleTech approaches it. You have 3 different movement modes, which have different values for it. Whereas we sort of treated them more like limits. So it was you would spend movement points, and as soon as you crossed the threshold from walking into running, then you'd be running, or if you used any jump jets, then you'd be jump jetting. So it made perfect sense that we could just stand up and then jump jet away, which was usually the safest thing to do because you just stood up and you spent a bunch of movement points. So
Exactly. It was like only if you'd fall a lot and expend more MP than you had jump MP would you not be able to jump. And that so rarely happens. So maybe you fall once, get back up, you still have 3 jump. Jump away, buddy, fly away to safety.
And then when I'm playing with these folks with their jump jet laden clan mechs, they just scramble to their feet and then fly away faster than my poor little inner sphere legs could chase after them. It was definitely annoying. I don't know how did we find this rule was wrong? We just read the rule book, I guess.
We just read the rule book. There came a point where I know this is definitely something that I could have just read. And I know that this was like one of those things that in-game we fall. We don't want to do another rule check, so we're like, okay, yeah, so you can jump, but it's like you need to have the MP and the walk MP. If you've burned 3 of it, it's the equivalent of 3 jump, blah, blah, blah. I know this is something we just used as a wash. So once we actually checked the rule, and I forget why, I think it was me. And it was me in the Arrow 4 game. Because I was like, well, I know you have to declare your movement, so why would they not say declare jump? And so then I went and read it. I'm like, oh yeah, well, it's obvious. We've just been doing it wrong all this time.
Actually, I'm sort of surprised this isn't an option. Has no BattleTech lore ever had someone like have their mech sit up and then just jump jet to their feet? That seems like something cool that some cool BattleTech hero would do. What's the coolest jump jet maneuver someone has done in a book that you can remember?
I can't remember anything as a general statement in life. But in this, I don't recall anything. But you're right, it makes sense. You think they'd have an advanced standing mode where you could maybe increase the difficulty of your stand attempt by like +2 to be able to jump if you were successful.
something like that would make sense. Or you can imagine the mech on its back, like hitting the jump jets and sort of just like scooping itself in the air. You can totally visualize it.
And then you need to have like certain stipulations, like you can't do it if you have leg-mounted jump jets. It's specifically if you have like torso-mounted jump jets, then you can hop yourself up. Yeah, we should lobby Catalyst to add some new advanced rules for that.
Yes, Keith Hahn, make it happen, baby. All right, what's another thing? Well, that was one thing we did that made the game easier for us. But another thing we did, which actually made the game harder for us, is we thought that if you overheated, when your MP was reduced, it also reduced your jumping movement points, which it doesn't.
And I don't feel like this one came up too much because we aren't pinned to like an early era, and a lot of folks like the clan mechs. Overheating isn't the biggest thing that happens. Probably you were the one that was most impacted by this because 1, you love clan mechs, and 2, you love getting really frickin' hot.
Yeah, I think I discovered this rule actually when I was playing a Jenner, because Jenners run hot, baby.
That does track, yes.
And I love Jenners. I remember that basically this was liberating. Without this rule, the Jenner's really crippled. But with this rule, man, the Jenner's good. Because you can run and you can strike, you can alpha strike, and then you can escape consistently. Whereas before, you could never afford to run in an alpha strike unless you know the alpha strike's gonna kill.
Like I say, I can't remember ever being impacted by this because half the mechs I run don't have jump jets and the other half don't get that hot. So this was pretty much just a handicap for Nathan and his pair of Jenners.
The pair of Jenners. Let's not talk about that game again. Oh my god. Yeah, it's funny. Most of these jumping things are mistakes that I'm totally responsible for and either handicapped me or liberated me. And the next one is the wackiest one because this has a similar vibe to being able to like run up 8-story buildings. It's like that same level of mistake, which is in BattleTech, when you're jumping, you have to jump in the most direct line to the destination, assuming that it's passable. So if there's something in front of you can't pass, you can go around it. But you have to take the straightest line that's legal. If you have a partial wing, which is a design quirk, it allows you to veer off by 1. But I actually thought it was almost like Armored Core, where you could jump and hover around in any way you wanted. So literally, every time I had a jump mech, I'd like land in trees, and then I'd have 8 jump. I'd jump forward, then to the right, then to the back, then to the left, then forward, then to the right. I just circle around my main hex and then land back in the hex. So even though I'm never leaving that individual spot, I'm circling around. So I'd give myself like a huge to hit modifier. I remember in that really long campaign we were playing where it was like the role-playing campaign, I was playing a Koshi and everyone else was assaults. And that's the only way I survived. I was always spinning every single turn. Spinning in the air. I guess you can't do that.
Yeah, I do remember this from when I was just getting introduced to the game, and for some reason I insisted on playing Inner Sphere mech, so I'd be plodding along with my like 5 run speed, and then these frickin' little clan mechs would land in front of me, shoot me, and then the next turn they would just like spiral in the air, becoming untouchable, and then land and shoot me again. And I do specifically remember thinking like, man, this sucks. I'm not a fan of this.
As being attacked by a whirling dervish. Every single clan mech became a whirling dervish. So insane.
And interestingly, there's a pilot ability that lets you do this, isn't there?
I think there's a pilot ability that lets you have a partial wing equivalent. And the partial wing lets you go out of the way by 1.
Oh, what was that called?
It isn't Jump Jacker or Jumping Jack. Damn that ability.
That only would make things worse. Thankfully, we didn't have any Jumping Jack when we were making this mistake, because that would have been absolutely awful.
Well, when I was playing that role-playing game, my Koshi did. He had Jumping Jack. No wonder he could survive against like assaults and stuff like that, just spinning and shooting. I think, one thing that's interesting about this rule mistake, and because we're talking about sort of the narrative with Tren Sparks earlier in our previous segment, to me, is this podcast called the Renegade HPG Podcast, and he's always talking about how do you think mechs move? And he talks about how, as the video games were developing, the mechs sort of evolved to be more like walking tanks than the fiction actually explains them to be. But this version of jump jetting, it's like a rocket. It's like rockets strapped to your feet, right? So it's pretty much, in my opinion, pretty much reinforces that concept of the feeling of the walking tank. Whereas the old one, the rule mistake, really, once again, has the feeling of like Armored Core or something like even Gundam.
Yeah, Robotech, Gundam, those sorts of things. Zipping back and forth, somewhat agile. Maybe that would like make more sense to someone who'd been in the hobby since that was BattleTech. For me, like a lot of the designs that I recognize are the Piranha Games designs, the stuff that I saw in Harebrained Schemes and stuff. So to me, like mechs are chunky, they're hefty, and some maneuverability, being able to jump and gracefully land at great distance. You know, I understand the tactical value of that, but the like zipping back and forth thing sort of breaks that vision in my mind.
With these three things in consideration, so how do these each impact the game? I guess I'll answer the question because it just impacted me.
Hey, Nathan, how do these three things impact you in the game?
So being able to jump after standing, first, it decreased the risks of falls. So now falls are such a trap. Like if you're a spider and you fall, oh, you're in trouble. Whereas before, if you're a spider and you fall, oh, no big deal. You just get up and jump away. So the fact that now you can make a light mech fall, and then even if they're jumpy, you know that, oh man, their movement's going to be really reduced. All of a sudden, they're trapped for that round, like they're put in molasses all of a sudden. That changes things a lot. Overheating, reducing jump MP, we already sort of discussed this, but it makes certain builds much more viable, such as the Jenner. And indirect jumping, the stupid indirect jumping like we were playing it, honestly, hands down, indirect jumping as we were playing it was just the best movement mode in the universe. It's just ridiculously cheap. Screw Jumping Jack. Jumping Jack's great, but if you could choose to have this ability, just jump all the time. But as soon as you lose it, you realize jumping now has a different important strategic value. It's not always the best. Now it is times where it's needed and times where it's not.
Yeah, I actually did run into the first one, not making the mistake, but wishing I could make that mistake when you're at the local games convention and playing some BattleTech there at some Catalyst event. And the Highlander I was piloting just could not stay on its feet. Every turn, I was sitting there with my face in the dirt, and I'd stand up, and I just could not get out of danger because I just didn't have enough running MP to be able to get anywhere after standing up. It actually made it really like a tough choice for like, you know, am I going to run here? There's nowhere for me to actually run, but if I stay on the ground, it's really going to suck. And as we were playing it, where you could jump jet afterwards, like that would have been a huge boon if I could have just flown away after I scrambled to my feet.
Totally. Retreat like the cowardly Highlander you are.
Hey, I took my lumps and died heroically.
As I recall, you did quite well. Better than I did, that's for sure.
I did. But I would have done better if I didn't have to keep sitting there in the middle of 3 shooting me directly in the face and butt.
Oh man, those butt shots. That's what gets ya. So yeah, these are this episode's bungles, all related to jump jetting and, oh man, pretty significant changes to how the game plays out.
I think that's all the jump jet mistakes we make, but you never know.
We will see. We will see.
Tertiary objective, Stories of the Inner Sphere segment. Initiating.
Neuer Wiesbaden, New Hessen, Capellan Confederation, 20th of June, 3007. They say Locust pilots are a little bit crazy, Abby thought as she looked up at her ride. Some attributed the craziness to the nature of the mech. Some called it a nuance in the neural field, and others simply dismissed Locust pilots as having a penchant for self-destruction. However, MechWarriors who drove the LCT-1M Locust often enough differed. They swore the machine had a spirit of its own. Abby wasn't one of those, but she felt there was something about the mech itself,
Something that got into your head. Something she liked. She anticipated that feeling as she climbed up the ladder to the cockpit. Every time she donned her neural helmet and activated the interface, it was like her Locust was humming some sort of vibration directly into her brain. On her climb to the cockpit, she took a moment to admire the stylized cartoon cricket in running shoes, smoking a cigar, and dual-wielding six-shooters. The bold red stylized script spelling out the mech's name, Corridor. None of the techs could remember who originally painted the mascot or how long ago, but Abby always took time to touch it up whenever she could. Techs were removing the lines that secured the mech to the dropship's cocoons, and the chief tech merely gave Abby a thumbs up when she made eye contact. Corridor was ready to go, as there had been plenty of time in transit to address routine maintenance. Swinging into the cockpit, Abby scanned the boards. Wireframe green, reactor on scram, sensors online and returning pings from the immediacy of the mech bay, long-range missile bin half full. After donning her neural helmet and connecting the leads, she tightened the straps to the command couch and took a deep breath before determinedly reaching over and switching the reactor off scram. When the engine thrummed to life, the myomeris tensed with initial charge, and she felt that bond to the machine. Immediately, she wanted to charge out at full throttle, sprinting around like a mad woman who had mistakenly been given 20 tons of war machine. But not right now. There was a lot of rubble to navigate to the first waypoint on her recon route. After easing Corridor out the bay and down the dropship's ramp, the next hour consisted of minimal throttle and constant course correction through rough terrain. The burnt remnants of an older conflict. To Abby, Corridor seemed almost annoyed. The slow pace incompatible with its nature as a fast mover. Easy there, boy. Almost clear. Her company was holed up in the ruins of Neuer Wiesbaden, on a scavenging hunt for the next big score. Coming off a Free Worlds League garrison contract, her unit, Garrett's Freebooters, was scavenging a city that had been destroyed during the First Succession War. Or the second. She thought the third was still officially going on, but was slowing down as all sides were running out of resources. The Freebooters, like many small mercenary units, often supplemented their income through scavenging opportunities, and their CO, Captain Garrett Ross, had both a predilection for history and a knack for picking good sites. From the boss's briefing, she gathered they were looking for a high-value something, supply cache something used by the Caps way long ago, and which got bombarded from orbit by the Fed rats. Maybe. Abby tended to daydream through briefings, but the boss knew when a site is destroyed from orbit, scavengers generally pick from the top and outskirts of the rubble pile. He also reasoned that the site warranted orbital bombardment because it was protecting something, often deep underground. The theory being that if an opposing force couldn't destroy what was underground, you could just bury it and deny the enemy those assets. Locals generally don't appreciate strangers showing up with industrial mechs and digging through their graveyards while battle mechs run patrols around the site. But fortunately, these particular locals were occupied elsewhere. Comstar News Bureau vids showed the garrisoning Ariana Grenadiers currently duking it out with the Deneb Light Cavalry Detachment over more intact cities, 200 clicks to the north. The ruins of Neuer Wiesbaden were open for what Garrett Ross referred to as an appraisal in force. Records from a civil engineering test case, obtained from Garrett's frequent library trips on their last assignment, depicted a reinforced bunker with military characteristics in the eastern portion of the city. The opportunity was too good to pass up, so the freebooters had burned in under an obscure cargo company's transponder and plopped their Union right down in the rubble close to the suspected bunker. The faux transponder probably didn't fool anyone, but as long as they made no moves to look like they were reinforcing the Grenadiers or the DLC, they would probably be left alone. It had been 6 weeks since Abby felt Corridor sway beneath her, and she was excited for the first patrol outside the city. Down into and out of the last crater, a flat expanse lay before her. If she were more superstitious, she would swear Corridor was braying to run. As the internal gyro spun up to balance the mech, she throttled Corridor forward at half speed. The Locust frame settled into a rhythm. Unlike most mechs, the bat-canted knee and proportionally longer lower legs caused a lot of movement in the torso, even at a walking pace. It significantly jostled the pilot in the command couch, enough that more than one new Locust driver had regurgitated lunch over the command console when throttling up for the first time. No simulator had ever been able to accurately reproduce the motion. Most Locust drivers left the safety harness straps a little loose so they could rock their hips and shoulders to counter the chassis's sway, like an experienced equestrian moving with a horse. Abby had a quick tightener on her 5-point harness, so if she felt corridor about to go over, she could yank the tightener and lock her firmly into the command couch while she awaited impact with the ground. Her techs had claimed she wouldn't have time to do so, but being able to sway with the machine's gait seemed to further bond her with the mech. Maybe we are crazy. A quick glance at her screens showed no magnetic resonance traces, no heat blooms on thermal, and no radio traffic outside freebooter channels. She brought the throttle up to 2/3 and nosed down the torso a bit to lean into the run. She cut to the right quickly, leaning deep into the turn and springing out of it. She cut left, twisting the torso into it and opening the stride. Full throttle now. She leaned corridor left and right, serpentining the mech between the few remaining obstacles on the open plain. To the left, she spied a canal, deep but narrow, about 5 meters across. She shouldered the mech toward it, lining up the timing. Lacking jump jets, Locusts were often considered a substandard recon mech, so consequently, or because we are crazy, Locust drivers seemed inclined to hurdle obstacles whenever possible. The canal proved too tempting an obstacle for Abby to ignore. Approaching at near top speed, she timed the left foot to land just at the paved edge of the canal, then shoved the throttle forward. A quick throttle tweak planted the right foot on the opposite side, and the mech resumed the fast rocketing gait of full throttle. She let out a "Woo!" only she and Corridor could hear. It seemed like utter freedom, tearing up the plane in one of the fastest mechs ever made. Perfect concentration, eyes forward, looking for other obstacles to snake around or stride over, rigorously putting the Locust through its paces, right up to the design limit, which was probably why she didn't notice the pips dropping one by one down on the MegRes screen, heat blooms blossoming on the thermal. At least, not until the sound no MechWarrior wants to hear chimed through the earbuds inside the neurohelmet. Target lock? I'm being painted! Without thinking, she fell back on instinct and juked Corridor to the left, both legs extended to the right under the mech's torso. Laser burn flashed across the targeting screen, and tracer rounds from an autocannon sailed past to the right side of her cockpit. She twisted the Locust farther to the left and throttled back up to full before sparing a moment for her screens. Damn, where'd they come from? Wasn't paying attention. The first salvo came from a Shadowhawk behind her, tagged by the battle computer as a standard -2H. To her left, the computer tagged an STG-3R Stinger that was still spinning up its reactor to full. On the right was another Stinger raising its Omicron 3000 laser to line up a shot on her. Dead ahead at long range was a JR-7-D Jenner. Damn, looks like I ran right past a powered-down recon lance. Some patrol preventing a wide flank or maybe looking to exploit one. No time to think, just run, 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 run! A quick glance at her 360 view strip did not give her much confidence. Both Stingers were in her 10 o'clock, an excellent flanking position. The Jenner was ahead, to her 1 o'clock, throttling up to flank the right side. All three light mechs were moving to box her in so the Shadowhawk on her 6 could line up the kill. Double damn! Abby keyed on her comm.
Freeboot home. This is 1-4. Contact 1 medium and 3 light mechs, vector 280 from home. 1-4 is escape and evade.
The warning out, she spun 120 degrees to the right and toggled her weapons to hot. Gotta get past the Shadowhawk before they box me. She fired a quick salvo at the Jenner, both the Martel laser and the Holly LRM-5. The intent wasn't to hit so much as to slow the enemy mech down, opening a gap between it and the Shadowhawk. Both Stingers fired their lasers, one shot passed behind, not compensating for the speed, but the other tagged her right arm, turning her armor wireframe yellow in an instant. She'd figured one of the stingers would land a shot, but their mistake was not making it on the run. She was throttled up full while they were at barely a walk, so with any luck, she would significantly extend the distance by the time their lasers recycled. But the Jenner had recovered from its scare and was now lining up a shot on her left side, which held one of her Holly 5s. Also, the Shadowhawk had planted its feet and was carefully tracking her, its torso twisting. Damn, crossfire! She wrenched Corridor to the left, closing slightly with the Jenner, but extending the range to the Shadowhawk, although exposing her rear. Any shot from the Shadowhawk's main weapons to her back, and it would be over. The moment her Martel and Holly 5 showed green on the board, she cracked off a shot at the top of Corridor's stride, where her mech was least affected by movement. The laser went wide and only one missile hit the Shadowhawk, which still felt like a victory. 2 steps later, she wrestled Corridor another 120 degrees to the right, leaning her mech into the turn at an incredible angle it seemed impossible to hold, only the gyro and momentum carrying Corridor out of the turn. Then, the Shadowhawk fired. The autocannon passed high, and the LRM salvo dug up the ground in front of Corridor as the enemy pilot attempted to lead their target. Abby knew why, though. They were gauging speed and distance for the follow-up shot with the laser, which required no lead. The laser hit and took the right side Holly 5 clean off. Corridor weathered the rest of the blast, but off balance, it stumbled for 2 steps before resuming its run. Abby's comm clicked on.
1414. This is 11. Sit rep. This is 14,
she replied.
Survival mode, returning to base ASAP. Copy 14. Rolling out welcome wagon. Good luck.
All just down to moving now. But where to? Abby estimated the recharge time for the Shadowhawk's weapons while gauging the Jenner's speed. Luckily, the Stingers were now at an extremely long range. They may have already fired again and missed for all she knew, but she couldn't keep up with all the threats. The Jenner was paralleling her track to keep her herded inside the Shadowhawk, which was still at an optimum firing distance, the medium mech casually walking backward while its torso lazily swiveled to track her. It's gonna go for an alpha strike, probably aimed at my legs. Then, let's see how fast you can really track. Abby leaned the Locust farther to the right to cross the Shadowhawk while the Jenner fired another shot that went wide. The maneuver seemed to catch the Shadowhawk pilot off guard as it throttled in reverse and increased its torso twist. It seemed to stutter a little over some large rocks, causing it to momentarily lose its track. She roared past the mech's 12 o'clock, hoping the pilot hadn't thought to use their jets to quickly hop and rotate. Fortunately, the Shadowhawk stayed on the ground, but it was able to get around enough to line up its autocannon laser and LRMs. Even knowing her throttle was at full, Abby pushed it again in a vain effort to squeeze a few more kph out of Corridor. Assuming the Shadowhawk's weapons were reloaded and ready, she figured she had one chance, and only the truly crazy would even think of trying it. Risking a glance at the 360, she saw the Jenner back off, yielding the kill to its commander. The Shadowhawk setting in for the shot. Corridor rocked hard at full throttle, the canal approaching rapidly, while she assumed the Shadowhawk pilot was making their last-second adjustments. Just short of the canal, she slammed the throttle down. The gyro whined in complaint at the sudden shift in momentum. Shock absorbers in the upper and lower legs shrieked as they exceeded their design limits, and the cockpit pitched violently forward, looking almost straight down. She twisted Corridor to the left and pulled its nose up just short of the canal. The forward unspent momentum was converted into lateral momentum as she placed the mech directly over the middle of the canal in mid-step and throttled hard back to stop, pulling the harness tight as she did. Corridor dropped right into the canal bed, on both feet. She lowered the mech into the legs, from ankle to back-canted knee, lay flat on the ground in the middle of the canal, as far hull down as she could go. Explosions and light above her threw debris down on the cockpit. She was correct on the alpha strike, but the canal edge took most of the hits. No effective damage to Corridor. Not waiting for the dust to settle, she lurched the mech up and sped down the depression in the canal, Corridor's cockpit just clearing the top of the canal. Abby spared a look back at the Shadowhawk. It seemed confused, if a mech could look confused. Corridor had been painted and locked on, then it simply just dropped out of view. Abby gave the opposing pilot a wink and let out a solid, "Woo!" of victory. In a half-click, the side of the canal closest to the city banked less steeply, and using her mech's momentum and long legs, she raced up the side. The 360 now showed all the enemy mechs at the edge of their weapon ranges. They could have tossed a few LRM salvos at her, but their most effective weapons couldn't have hit her. The annoying rubble of Neuer Wiesbaden now looked more welcoming than when she had left an hour ago. In the distance, she saw her company mates sortying out to cover her. In her rear, the enemy mechs looked to be regrouping in a more formal battle line. Garrett's Mad-3R Marauder pivoted its torso to get a better read on her and the enemy.
1-4, this is 1-1. Sit rep.
Abby let out with joy, clear of danger, and Corridor sprinted forward, spirited by the sheer abandon of its pilot.
You Locust drivers are a strange lot.
The Marauder's torso straightened in line with its legs.
All booters. Looks like we've been made. Let's grab what we can, then bail. We're not in this for a slugfest.
The freebooters' mechs began forming a battle line while industrial mechs picked up the pace inside the rubble. The clock was now ticking. That was irrelevant to Abby, though. Minus one arm and some armor, she jolted the throttle up and down, jerking her mech left to right in an odd dance. For a moment, she thought she could feel Corridor's mood, if a machine could have one. Content, with a small victory and disproportionately showing it off. We Locust drivers certainly are a bit mad, she mused to herself. This has been Run Locust Run, written by Westin Riverside and found in Shrapnel, the official BattleTech magazine, issue 13. Remember to check out Shrapnel for more radical stories set in the BattleTech universe. And what a trip it was, MechWarriors. Another month missiled through and another deployment of BungleTech blown away. As a quick note, your reviews on the podcast platform you listen on help us spread the word, and we super appreciate reading them. They fill us up with the type of blind confidence we need to bungle our way to oblivion. Also, remember, if you want to chat, you can find us on Twitter at BungleTechTweet, via email at bungletech@outlook.com, or in our booth of the welcoming Valhalla Club's Discord linked in the description. Until next time, MechWarriors, good fortunes on the battlefield. Selah.
All podcast objectives complete. Podcast shutdown sequence initiated.